So this is a single directory components. You can see at the bottom, it is in core, Drupal core, which is a big deal. So my name is Mike Herchel. I have been working with Drupal for something like, what are you doing? Something like 15, 16 years. I've been doing a lot of Drupal core front-end development since probably like 2018-ish. I am primarily responsible for the Olivero theme, but I've also done a lot of cool things like the V's responsive grid and core and stuff like that. I work for Edgelina. I've only been working here for maybe like 3 or 4 months, but it's been great so far. And we do work for large federal websites. And so, yeah, so I'm on the internet at those places. Notably not here is the person who wrote most of the code for this. This is Matteo. Matteo lives in this beautiful island in the Mediterranean called Majorca. Works for Lullabot, and while he was at Lullabot, he was working on the IBM project, and IBM and Lullabot sponsored him to create a module called CL Components that was the precursor for single directory components. And like he was demoing it for me one day. I used to work at Lullabot, and I was like, this really needs to go into core, and then we made it happen. It wasn't. Oh yeah, so this is. So the guy with the plywood is Matteo, and then the other two are like front-end developers. So like, that's Matteo doing all his work, and then like that's me like using single directory components. So yeah. So notably, it wasn't just us, of course. A lot of hard work and effort goes into this, especially notably is Lori Escala. Lori's a core product manager now, and he helped. He's a core committer, and he helped just shepherd this in. And also notable is Christina Chimidius, who is a front-end framework manager. She worked with me, Lori, and Matteo on like figuring out what the API is for us front-end developers going to be working with it. Pierre did a lot of work. Pierre is a maintainer for the UI patterns module, which basically does a lot of similar things that SDC does, and so he made sure that the code was abstracted out enough where he could build on top of it well, which is like super important. And then Alex Pott and Lee Rowlands are both core committers, and they gave some excellent code reviews, and so that was very important. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, obviously single directory components, but we're going to talk about what problem we're fixing, how single directory components works. I am going to convert a component to use single directory components in a section I like to call coding karaoke. We're going to talk about how modules and themes can extend it, systems like Storybook and Fractal, and how you can, if it can work with that. And we're going to talk about the future. So there's a lot of really cool things happening here. So who here out of this group of people is a front-end developer? Who here has like felt pain in Drupal's front-end process, you know? Yeah. Like as you're a Drupal front-end developer and you're coming into this, like if you're relatively new, there's a lot of questions, you know? Like, how do you know where your CSS and JavaScript are coming from and why they're being loaded? Where do they exist? You know, the CSS, JavaScript files, and template files, they're all kind of hard to find in that theme directory structure, and they're all like scattered all over the place, you know? You know, you look at your template and you're like, what data does this template expect to see? You know, and where does that template exist? There's a lot of stuff that's like I've been working on it for so long, I can navigate it and I know it really well. But if you're coming into it for the first time, you're like, what the heck? This is really hard. The goal is components. You know, components are reusable UI elements, and they can be nested. You can nest a component in another component. You know, and they take data from the system. You know, and you can have variations of the component. You know, like that is what we want to do, and this is where the web is. When we were investigating bringing this into core, we were doing a lot of due diligence, and so we said, all right, what other systems out there are using components? And the truth is that all of them were. Like pretty much every other system uses components, except for Drupal. And then they think they're all having this awesome component party, and we're not invited. But we ended up crashing it, so that's us to the side. You can see that cool little Drupal icon. So what is a single directory component? We explored different variations of components, so you've probably heard of single file components. They might be popular in like React and Vue and stuff like that. And we use single directory components. So a single file component is where you have like your JavaScript, your markup, and your styles all in one file. And it's actually really, really nice. But Drupal, a lot of people within Drupal use things like Sass and PostCSS. And you just can't get that to work very well with if you have to split it out from like a file or something like that. We elected to do single directory components, and let's talk about that a bit. One thing that is great about components is it's easy to find and delete that. So as a front-end developer, if you're coming into a code base that you might not be that familiar with, can you delete CSS without having to worry you're just going to screw something up somewhere? No, it's like really difficult. CSS is global. With components, you can delete the whole directory and you know what that's going to affect. You can modify the CSS in that directory and you know it's going to affect that component. Everything within that directory affects that component and nothing else does. So I'm going to do this thing, as I said, called coding karaoke. I have this video of me. I have a video where I converted a component to use SEC, and that's going to answer a lot of your questions, and I'm going to go into details afterwards. So unlike regular karaoke, I'm very sober. So hopefully this will go well. I just practiced it 10 minutes ago. So this is the Florida Drupal Camp website right here. Florida Drupal Camp's coming up in February. Y'all are invited. It's in Orlando, and the weather's really nice in Orlando in February. This is our schedule item right here. Our schedule item is basically a details HTML element. It has a bunch of data in there. It has contextual links. We're going to convert that schedule item to use a single directory component. So the first thing we're going to do, and you're pretty familiar with this step right here, is we're just going to disable CSS and JavaScript aggregation because we need to look at the CSS. Brand new to 10.1 though is enabling Twig development mode and disabling cache through the UI. Now you can still do that through your settings.php and development.services.yaml, but I wanted to say like, hey, this is in 10.1 now. So when we inspect this, we're going to see where this is coming from. It's coming from node-session-caesar.html.twig. This is all standard Drupal at this point, and all stuff that, if you're a themer, you're probably pretty familiar with. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to enable the single directory components module. There's no UI for it, you just enable it. Keep in mind that you only have to enable it for 10.1. Once it's not experimental anymore, it's just going to be part of Drupal. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to install Drupal core dev. Now this is not required, but what this does is this enables SDC to output really useful error messages. So this is our starting point. This is our node-session-teaser. You can see all my markup and all that type of stuff that I have in here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the theme and we're going to create a components directory. And we're going to create a folder for our component under there. We're going to call our component details. And we're going to create two files, details.component.yaml and details.twig. I want to say that, as I pause this right here, the first time I did this, it took me like an hour. I'm going really fast. And I want to, this is 10 minutes long. This video is 10 minutes long. But the first time you do it, it's going to take a little bit of time, and then you're going to get better and better at it. I've neglected to mention that at the beginning. So within that details.component.yaml, I don't know the syntax, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the documentation. We have this annotated example right here. I'm just going to copy and paste stuff. I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing into that details.component, and I'm just going to start deleting all the crap I don't want. You know, I'm going to name it details. We're not doing any replacements. We are going to have a schema in here. We're not going to make anything required as of yet. And we're like basically I'm just deleting stuff so I know what the syntax is, but all this stuff isn't quite valid yet. But this is our starting point right here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the Sass and CSS into the components directory. I'm just going to rename it to details.css and details.scss. You got to update the Sass, of course, to pull in your variables from wherever the heck it pulls into variables from. And yeah, man, this is going fast. I want to make sure I'm not like in a super speed here. Playback. It says normal. I'll slow it down.
Slower,
yeah. I did this like really, really well at DrupalCon. So the first thing after the component.yaml, we're going to copy and paste the markup from the node-session-teaser into the details.twig. And then we're going to put these side by side and we're going to start building out our schema. So what variables do we have here? We have attributes. We don't know what type this is just yet, so we're just going to have to I'm going to come back to that and show you how to figure that out. So what else do we have in here? We're passing in classes. Classes is an array. We're passing in a label. Label's the title. That's just a string. And we have a couple booleans in here. The booleans are is non-session and is training, and they're just little check boxes to let us know what we're doing with that. And we're passing in the content array. Now you can split this up if you'd like. In this case, just for brevity, I just kind of bring it in as a big object. I say it's a content array, but it's an associative array, so it needs to be an object when you're defining it. URL is just a string. And the title suffix is an array. Title suffix is what enables you to have those contextual links when you're logged in. And so we delete the markup from the node-session-teaser. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a Twig embed. Twig embed is like a standard Twig tag, and it allows you to pass in both blocks and variables. So the variables are also known as props, depending on what you want to call them. So we're going to go ahead and pass in these variables here. And we're going to create a couple Twig blocks. We're going to create one for the meta, like the meta is like the room number, the time, and all that type of stuff. And this is going to be a Twig block right here. So a Twig block is analogous to a slot. So we're going to create a Twig block called meta, and we're just going to paste in our node-session-teaser, we're going to paste this little logic in there. It says if it's non-session, do this, yada yada. And then we got to put, of course, the placeholder within the details.twig. We're going to do the same for the description. We're going to create a Twig block called description. Now, in this particular case, I don't necessarily need to use Twig block right here, but I have another content type that is not going to use a description, so I figured I would just use one right here. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. I have these set tags up here, and I'm just going to kind of move that into the embed right here. And I don't have to do this, but it just makes everything like a little bit cleaner. So I got this in here, now I can delete those, and yeah. So let's clear the cache. Do you think it's going to work? Hell no, it's not going to work. But we have a couple like really good error messages, and I wanted to show these to you. It says is non-session. It says a string value is found, but I told it it's a Boolean. So these are SDC has really good developer experience. So long story short, it's passing in a string and needs a Boolean. We're going to use Twig ternary operators right here to force it to pass in a Boolean. So let's give it a refresh, and is it going to work? Yes, it will work this time. Eventually. Yay, so you can kind of see it's working, it's expanding. I can see my little contextual links on the right-hand side. Still some work to do. We got to figure out what this attributes is right here. And we got to update our slots. I forgot to put my slots in the schema earlier, so I'm going to add description and meta. We got to make sure the indentation's proper. And now let's figure out what this attributes are. So within the Node-S session, I'm gonna do a dump of the attributes. Now within Drupal 9.5 and later, the dump function has been reworked. It's now basically a wrapper for Symfony var dumper. So it outputs a bunch of really, really cool things. Like in this particular case, it shows us the class that we're using, where it says Drupal core template attribute. That's what we have to put into the schema. So let's copy and paste that and put that in there. And after changing the YAML, I really should be clearing cache. I totally forget to, but it works. You can see everything working right here. So there's a couple more things that we want to do here. We want to use the only keyword, and the only keyword prevents anything from from going into that, because we want to be very explicit on what's going into our component. So we put in the only keyword right there, and the only keyword, just to make sure it is what we have right there.
You mean prevents additional attributes? Sorry.
Yeah. So the only will everything that's defined when we're defined that Twig embed only says only this. Like if you have something else defined, it won't go in there. So there's a couple more things that we need to do right here. So let me go back. So you can see like right here, we're doing this include of an SVG. And the component shouldn't be reaching outside the component, you know? So let's move that SVG into the component. So we're going to create a folder called IMG for our images. And then I'm going to fumble around a little bit and look to see where this SVG is, which kind of like reinforces the fact it's hard to find crap. So like, let's see where this is. There it is. I'm going to move this SVG in here. But then how do I reference this SVG from an include? So I'm going to do a dump again. And when it outputs this time, you're going to see a little bit of everything. And at the bottom of this, you're going to see this array that's called component metadata. Single directory components gives this to us. It's called component metadata, and it's an array. I'm going to copy and paste that. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to change this Twig, this include tag into an include function. And I don't have to do this, but include functions are best practice. So let's do that right here. I'm going to do component metadata in there, but I'm doing a couple things wrong right here, and you're going to see this. So like, I forgot the key in component metadata, and then you're going to see like right here, I also forgot my end parentheses, because it wouldn't be a real demo unless I forget parentheses. So like, let's get in and fix that. I realized, all right, fix the end parentheses, and then I realized that it's not just component metadata that I'm referencing. I do a dump of that, and I see there's component metadata.path is what I got to do. See, the path key shows me where I am. So let's update this. So component metadata.path. Is it going to work now? Let's see. Hell no, because I got the directory name wrong. Shit. All right, so let's fix that. All right, is it going to work right now? Yes, it works. And you can see this little, you can see me, like this little SVG, this little arrow, that's what we were wrestling with right there. But now it's working. A couple more things we got to update. The CSS is referencing outside, like let's move that file in here too. So let's find that PDF, SVG, and then update our CSS to just like do a relative path, and that works. You can see the, let me move that right there. The PDF icon's under there somewhere. Oh, there it is. And so yeah, so let's kind of set some required. So like what's required here? You know, our classes array is required, our label is required, our content is required. You know, you can obviously set that. We can do a little cleanup now. Like we have this library defined that we don't need anymore because SDC automatically includes these CSS and JavaScript file. So let's look at it in the DevTools, and you can see right here now, it says component start pub sub details, pub sub being the name of the theme. And it gives you this handy dandy emoji. The handy dandy emoji is like generated, and it'll change per component. And that's really useful if you have like nested components. You can see where one starts, one ends, just by eyeballing it. So this is where we end up right here. This is our component.yaml right here. And you can see immediately what's required and what data type it is. And this is super useful, you know, if you're pulling this in. And then like the next thing is our node-session-teaser. And you can see that what we're pulling in, how we're referencing it, what data we're passing. And then the last thing that we're going to see right here is the details.twig. And the details.twig is simply all the markup for this. And the beauty of all this is because everything's self-contained, I can copy and paste this, and I can give this to all of you all. You know, and it is the Florida Drupal Camp website is open source, by the way. And you can take this and copy it and bring it into your own projects. And that's going to be pretty cool. So that is my code in karaoke right there. Let's get back to the session. So speaking of karaoke, there may be a bar called the Bit Bar later, and there may be at 9 o'clock at the Bit Bar karaoke of that. If people show up there, I may sing. I'm just saying that out loud. So let's look at this component metadata file, because this is kind of the tricky part, right? As a front-end developer, who wants to define schemas? Like nobody. Like schema, like what the hell, you know? So you really don't have to define a schema if you're in a theme. If you're in a theme. If your module is, let me start this over again. If your component is in a module, your schemas are required. If your component is in a theme, it is optional. But you do need to have a file there called thing, you know, component.component.yaml or whatever. And you can just put a null there if you want. But like the goal of these components are not just to isolate your code, even though that's awesome. We want to expose these components to site builders. And if they're choosing maybe this component through like a little select list, you want to give that component a name, maybe a description. You want to say if it's stable or not. That's cool. Then, of course, we have schemas. Like, well, what if I want to, I don't know, expose my component into something like a layout builder and then have people fill it out? I want Drupal to create a form, you know, that says, you know, title and all that other stuff. Well, then you have to define your schema. You can see in this example right here, we're defining a email field. We're calling it mail. And you can see it's string, you can see the format is email, minimum length. All these values right here are defined within JSON schema. JSON schema is the standard, and it tells you what you can use and what you can't use. A lot of this is also within the Drupal documentation that we put together. We worked really hard on that. But as always, we could always use more too. More help on the documentation. So slots are basically big old strings that can contain anything. Slots are twig blocks. And then you have the option for library overrides. So by default, SDC will look for the name.css and the name.javascript. If it sees those, it will include those wherever that component is. So it'll automatically load it. But there are times, of course, where you have multiple JavaScript files or multiple CSS files, and you want to load them all. Well, you can override that through the library overrides key. And the syntax of this is very similar to the libraries, your theme.libraries.yaml. And this isn't like additional, it's overriding. So like if you define your JavaScript, your JS key right there, you also have to define like, your regular JavaScript file in addition to the new ones. You can pass through attributes and you can declare dependencies. And as you saw from the example, the annotated example, like we have a whole bunch of comments explaining exactly what those are. So components can replace other components. So in this particular case right here, you can see that this component that we have defined right here will replace a thing component that's defined in your thing.module. So wherever that thing.module component might exist, we're overriding that. So a couple notes about replacement. For your component to be replaceable, you have to define the schema. And the schema's got to match, so obviously, you can't replace one component with another that has an incompatible schema. When you if you need to make a change to the component, like let's say a module defines a component, and you want to make a change to that component, you have to copy and paste the whole thing. You can't just copy and paste, say, the Twig file, JavaScript file, or anything like that. You got to do the whole thing, and then you're forking it, and then you declare that replaces key. That gives you full control, and it works everywhere. Another key is that only themes can replace components. Modules cannot replace other modules' components. If we allowed that, that would create this horrible circular options, dependencies, which would just get ugly very fast. So we don't allow that. So what's next for this? We want to provide components and themes and modules. So there's a lot of work within core to convert various components within Olivero to use SDC. There's also work in core to convert components within the Umami theme to SDC. And I don't think we did anything in Clara yet, but that might come. We want to expose components to site builders. And as of right now, this is all handled through Contrib. There's a couple modules out there where when you define your field formatter, you can point to a component. So a field formatter, for all those that might be new to Drupal, is you have your content type and you go to the Manage Display tab, and how do you want to display that? Well, you can install this module and you say, I want to use a component, and then it says what component you want to do, and then you can just map everything. And so there's work right now on getting the ability to insert components into via CK Editor. So let's say you're in CK Editor and you have a little icon, you press the button, and then you can insert a card or a CTA or something. And then you can do the same thing with potentially with Layout Builder. There's lots of cool options here, and this does the whole enable advanced ambitious site builder type thing. Component libraries are SDC is compatible with Storybook. There's a Lullabot repo which I can get you that Mateo's worked on that has integration with Drupal and Storybook, and there's also a module called CL Server, which enables Storybook to hook into Drupal's rendering pipeline. So if you're not familiar with Storybook, it just basically displays your components in isolation. And that's really useful for rapid development. So if y'all are going to take a picture of a slide, this is a good one. Lots of documentation, including a quick start guide, our annotated example component YAML. And so my whole narration of converting a component I threw up on YouTube. And there's also, I gave this session with Mateo at DrupalCon Pittsburgh, and so you can kind of listen to him if you want. There's a components channel in Drupal Slack that is very active because people are very interested about this. And people are asking questions. People are asking easy questions, hard questions, and we're trying to be very responsive in here. So I really encourage you to get in there and try to ask around. there's an SDC examples module that Matteo put together. And it's nothing that works, but you can download it and just kind of look at it, and just see the examples and see how it works. And so, how you can help, if you're interested in this, get to work and start converting stuff, and then start telling people about this. This is a new paradigm of theming, and it's going to make the front-end process a lot easier. But we need to let people know that this exists. If you're doing this, write some articles, and if you're going to a Drupal camp, give a talk on this. There's the components in Drupal Slack, and yeah. So I have about 15 minutes for questions, and that's it. Thank you. In the back.
I have two relatively, I think, short questions. The first is, it seems like it was still dependent on the normal Twig syntax and that Twig template being in place. Is that true?
Yep, although you can call it directly through a render array, and I don't know the syntax off the top of my head, but if you're in a module and you want to render directly to a component, that is possible.
But just an out-of-the-box implementation still requires you to follow or have.
Yeah. If you're using it in a theme, you're going to do it like this, and that's important because we looked at having within the YAML file, we looked at having a key that says use in. And you could potentially use let's say we have a use in key, and we put in there node session teaser or something like that. But then we have to do the mappings, and then how are we going to handle slots? And it gets a little messy. That's almost easier than Twig.
And so in that file, it was still important to have all the HTML markup outside of the block, right?
Yeah, let's look at a file right now, if you want. So I have all of this on the pull request right now. So I was also updating this to Drupal 10, and then I kind of screwed something up, so I haven't merged it. So we want details. So the details that Twig will contain all the markup right here.
Okay.
The node -- session -- teaser. Let's go down here. This doesn't contain any markup, but it potentially could inside of blocks.
Okay.
So right now you can see that this is just it's setting an array, doing a Twig embed. Now you could do a Twig include if you don't need blocks.
Sure.
And you can see the format that we have right here, and then we just have some blocks right here.
Cool. Now my last question, is it bad practice if you have a lot of components, for example, those arrows or the PDF SVG, if you have a lot of components that rely on similar or assets, is it bad practice to leave those in a components images library, or do you always put?
I would like to have everything, ideally, so first of all, best practices are still being kind of written.
Sure.
This is all new, and we're all trying to see what works and what doesn't work and what's understandable. That all being said, if you have a component, it should not be reliant on anything else other than a component, and that's just for isolation. You could abstract an image like that into its own component if you want. But yeah, I see what your point. What if you're using a background image or something like that? You don't want to load multiple copies of a background image.
Yeah, or even that arrow. Maybe you use the arrow in the session thing, but maybe you have an accordion.
Yeah. I would say in that case, I might even pull it into its own component. Within the components directory that'll exist in a theme and/or module, you can create subdirectories and then nest your components in there too. So, let's say you're doing something atomic design, where you have atoms, molecules, and stuff. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. You can create a directory structure like that too. So in that case, the arrow might be an atom.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Those are good questions. Go ahead.
How's the SAS being compiled inside of the component directory?
I have a, I can shoot you over this gulp file right here. Let me get back here. So I did this. This is for the Florida Drupal campsite, and basically I have a couple processes like right here. Like I have my main SAS function, which I call do sassy shit, and and then I have a couple tasks right here to compile the SAS directories. You know, that's just for like say global stuff, and then compile the component directory, and then my watch process kind of does both of those. If you'd like, I can get that to you, or you can track it down.
Okay, so you have a script built to compile the SAS back into the same directory.
Yes, yes. The component will look for, the SDC will look for a CSS file. SDC does not do any type of compilation or SAS compilation, because that would just be overly complicated. Anything else? Jim in the back?
How are people, you mentioned earlier, integrating with design libraries like Storybook and other ones. So are you keeping all of those files in the same directory?
So like, if you're doing something like Storybook or Fractal, like obviously, like, if you, the goal of like a component system like that is to be able to develop the component in isolation, which makes like the development process really easier. So your question is,
I still need two directories to keep it? Do I have a Storybook component and I have a Drupal single?
No, Storybook just looks at the components folder.
Awesome.
Yeah, I haven't personally set that up yet, but I know it works. I know several people have done that.
Okay, I was looking at Varbase. I think they were switching over to this also.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that yet. Go ahead. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah. I have two, actually.
Just one.
One is pretty technical. I missed the library overrides piece. Can you revisit that? Why would you use that? I think you were saying that there were, like most of the time it's like auto-included and you don't need to worry about it. So why would you use like a library's override in your component?
Yeah, so let me see if I can find, do I have a component in here that has, so all right, so the Florida Drupal Camp website, we have the hero right here, right? And the hero has a little JavaScript so you can pause and start this video and stuff. And I think within here, I declare dependencies on once. So like, are y'all familiar with what Drupal behaviors are or something like that? Like Drupal behaviors, like anything that gets Ajax entered through BigPipe gets run behaviors, and you should really wrap everything in a function called Drupal 1 so it only runs one time. But like obviously, if you have JavaScript in here, the JavaScript might be reliant on Drupal once, but how would it know to load it unless you create a dependency? So that's a use case for library overrides right here. Another potential use case is, let's say you're developing like components and you're using Bootstrap or something, and you need like, I don't know, the Bootstrap JavaScript or Bootstrap. You don't want to load that. You don't want to put that in every single component, because every single component, you don't want to load up like 20 copies of Bootstrap. That would be dumb, right? So you create like maybe a regular library called, you know, Bootstrap or something, and then you create a dependency on that, so it'll load it up only once. An example of this, I don't quite have this all done yet, but right now I'm in the process of doing converting the US web design system into single directory components right here. And I don't necessarily have any, oh yeah, I do have a dependency right here. So like, I have the US WDS card right here, and the card has a button in it. But the button has its own styles coming from something else, so I abstracted that out to a different library. Does that give you a couple of use cases or something like that? Another use case is like let's say you want to modify, I I don't know, like you know how you can pass in like that object and you can do like, you know, minified or header true or something like that if you need to do something like that. Or load more, like in Olivero, I'm looking at moving in the navigation to a single directory component, which I don't know if it's going to be possible because it's really like 3 things. But that has like a bunch of different CSS and JavaScript that I have split up just for like ergonomics. And if you want to pass in multiple things like that. So those are a bunch of different use cases. You had another question?
My other question is a little bit tangential, but it's about, this feels like to me from the outside looking in, this was like one of the fastest things that I've ever seen go into core.
Yeah.
And if it's, you know, from my project browser hat on, what do you think contributed to?
I have so many
success?
stories. So, it did get, so like, number one, it was fairly built already through CL components. Matteo is he's done a lot of Drupal core work. He's a fantastic developer. Matteo is, he's a maintainer for the JSON API subsystem. So, and he worked on getting that into core, so this is not his first rodeo, right? But at the same time, like, he was like at times getting like really frustrated. He's like, and I'm like, Matteo, we're gonna make 10.1, we're gonna do it. He's like, we're not gonna do it. And I'm like, bullshit, we're gonna do it. And here's how we're gonna do it. I would write blog articles about it. And the blog articles were overtly like meant to like get people excited and also put a little bit of pressure on the core committers. and I told them that, you know, and like, so a lot of this came down to like, I have a good relation. I have a like, I'm friends and I have a good relationship with Lori Escala, who's the product manager, and so I would schedule regular meetings with him and Matteo, and this is how we did with Olivero too, and we would just go over what we had to go over, and then like it came down to like at the very end, it's like, is it going to go? We were like, we had like a deadline of a week before alpha got released, and it needed to come in that, and so finally, like, you know, I'm writing another blog article, gently pinging people, and it goes in, but then it didn't go in as beta, which means it was not going to be in the actual release. It would be in the Drupal core code base, but when they released the 10.1.0, it wouldn't go in that. So we had to do like this whole other issue and bug the release manager catch, and but it got done. I don't know if that answers your question. I can tell you for Project Browser, a couple things that really help for me are like, number one, schedule meetings with core committer. You know, so like when I was doing Olivero and I was doing this, I would say like, hey Lori, like when do you have time in the next few weeks to schedule, like, you know, to give me 2 hours, and I would either have stuff ready for him to commit, or I would have just questions, you know. And so it was like really effective use of both of our times. And then another thing that helps is just writing about it, getting people excited about it. And that puts like that indirect pressure on the core committer team to actually do it. Anything else? All right, well, thank you.